All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Come on in. We ready for the convo. Is it justice or is it just us? So glad to have with us tonight guests, and we're going to bring them on here momentarily. I want everybody to come on in. Good evening. Good evening. We greet you tonight. It's a lot happening in the world today, baby. It's a lot happening in the world. And we need to get together tonight. We need to have a plan. We need some solutions. And I've got some wonderful people who are tuning in to share with us tonight who have just that. They got some solutions for us. So come on in. Come on in. Come on, I need you to share this. I'm going to ask even our guests if you'd be so kind to share this from your Facebook lives, your Facebook pages as well, so that others can connect with us tonight as we are having the conversation. Is it justice or is it just us? A lot of things are happening. A lot of things. Come on, everybody, tell me where you are. Tell me where you're from tonight as we check in this evening. All right. Come on in. Come on. Come on. Hey, Farmington Hills. All right. Come on in. Jacqueline Thompson, Janice. Hey, Brenda Maxwell, Fanny Eaton. What's happening? All right. Good evening to everybody. Tammy Davis. Hey, Spartanburg, Mississippi in the house tonight. Good evening to everybody. I pray that you all are staying safe wherever you are, tonight. We've got Pastor Q, pastor of the Third New Hope Church with us tonight. Pastor Keon Payton from the New Bethel Church in Pontiac with us tonight. Officer Jared Wambo from Southfield Police Department with us tonight. Attorney Brandy McMillan is with us tonight, and we are so grateful for them. We're waiting on one more, I believe, who is coming. We're glad to have all of these wonderful professionals sharing with us tonight as we gain some understanding, as we gain what people's positions have been. And we're glad to have all of you as well, as this is an interactive discussion, like an informal town hall. And so I want you to come on in to be a part of tonight's experience. The church has been silent in so many things, and we've got to take some position with some solutions tonight. And so I'm grateful for these who are coming on with us. Come on, we're giving everybody 45 more seconds here. Come on, share it. I need everybody. There's 80 of you that we can see right here and right now. I want all 80 of you to share it right now. Come on, I need you to share it. All 80 of you to share it. We're glad to have all of you with us tonight. Tell everybody to come on. We are making some real choices, decisions, solutions here in Southeast Michigan, and I'm sure others can benefit wherever you are in the world tonight. Good evening. Glad to have you on YouTube. Shout out to everybody on YouTube, and shout out to everybody on Facebook Live as we get ready to have the conversation. All right. My man, there he is. Also glad tonight to have my good friend and brother, Dr. Marcus Davidson, who will be joining us from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. All right, there's things happening all over the country. So I'm going to bring everybody in as we get ready to get started. Pastor Q, good evening.
Good evening to you.
All right. Pastor Payton, good evening.
Good evening.
All right. Officer Jared Wambo, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
All right. Attorney Brandy McMillan, good evening.
Good evening, Pastor.
All right. And my man, Dr. Davidson, good evening, sir.
My brother, how you doing? And sister,
All
my
right.
brothers and sister, how you doing?
Good. Good, man. Thank you all so very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to share with us in this conversation. We know what is happening in the world. And as we are all believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, before we get started tonight, I'm going to ask Dr. Davidson, come on and bless our time tonight.
All right, God, we come now to say thank you. Thank you for this time together. I pray, God, that you would bless our voices. God, I pray that you would just give us direction in these uncertain times, God. I pray that you would help us to stand boldly, unapologetically in these times. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
So again, good evening, everybody. We know what is happening in our country. We know the magnitude of what is happening in response to what has just transpired this week with law enforcement, and so we have I think, a good mixture of individuals who are sharing with us tonight. And so, if you have another device with you, you all can see the comments on the feed as well, if they're not being shown to you in your respective spaces. And so I want to encourage you all to share this and also be able to see the comments that people are making, as this is a interactive discussion, while at the same time a standard discussion with questions that we have already proposed. And so I'm ready. We're going to jump right in this evening. I'm going to start with Dr. Davidson, because the rest of us live in Southeast Michigan. And so we know what is happening in our area. Dr. Davidson, what is happening in the South? What is happening in Florida?
Um, in Florida, there are, matter of fact, I received a message today from my mayor and police chief about having a conversation. So I think the reality of what we're dealing with is in South Florida, we have people who are concerned, but because of the distance, there are some people I think that which is a nationwide problem. If it's not in my front yard, I'm not really that concerned about it. You know, those of us in the African American community, we are concerned. I've just not heard a lot from other communities that have seemingly voiced significant concern.
I see. All right. And let me also say tonight, regardless to how people are responding, I think that it is okay for people to respond. But how people are responding, I certainly have great concern, not just because there are being crimes that are committed, but at the end of the day, we are still in a pandemic. And I think that we have to be aware of that as we make responses, and know that there are consequences to our responses. And so I'm going to shoot to Brandy. And Brandy, if you would tell us what is the position of the written law concerning these things?
Well, with respect to, especially here in Michigan, I mean, we still have a stay home order in place until June 12th. So protests, yes, people are angry, people are upset, and people, want to protest. And I'm all for peaceful protests. But as you said, I mean, we're still in the midst of a health crisis. I think we still have to be mindful of, the bigger picture in our health. And so with that, I think that within reason, people rightfully are expressing themselves and have a right to do so. But within the confines of making sure that it's done respectfully, peacefully, and in accordance with the ordinance that are put in place.
Okay. All right, good. So I'm going to speak to Pastor Q. Pastor Q, you have a unique position. You serve as a pastor, but you also have some political background as well. What is your take at this point on how people are responding to what has transpired?
Yeah, thank you again for providing an opportunity to have this conversation. I've been kind of mute on social media and the like and speaking because I've really just been trying to discern what really is happening and the best way to position ourselves to respond. And, I think that oftentimes we use these terms about to describe protests. We say peaceful protests or riots or things of that nature. The kind of protests I'm engaged in and interested by is effective protest. Whatever is effective and making sure that our issues are heard, and not only heard but addressed is what I'm concerned about. And so I know that this seems a little bit out of bounds for a pastor to be saying, but I am a bit troubled when we're more moved by burning buildings than we are by dying bodies. And I think that, again, when we look at the, level of damage that will be done to properties and things of that nature, I was just in a conversation with a friend, Pastor Melick Thomas. I saw him mention this, that he remembers being in the protest and the CVS burning down. And he talked about 5 years later that CVS that burned down was now rebuilt and renovated. But yet the body of Freddie Gray cannot be resurrected, if you will. And so for us, we really have to make sure that we're being mindful about where we're placing our energy and not to be distracted, because the thing that really gets me is that we can't really put our finger on who are the perpetuators and provocateurs of this kind of what we would call non-peaceful protest, because there are always those who will try to infiltrate peaceful movements, and this is documented in our history, particularly in liberative movements across the decades, that people have infiltrated it in the disguise as sheep, really acting like wolves. And so, I'm very careful to generalize the actions and conducts of those who are out protesting, again, not being able to be clear on who is responsible for these more kind of radical methods of protesting. But again, I mean, there are no perfect kind of choices here. It seems like we're choosing between worse and worse options. Particularly in the midst of a pandemic, that we still are in. My heart has just been heavy praying strongly that it doesn't have a sort of residual negative impact as a result. We already know that our community, the African American community, was, disproportionately impacted by infections and fatalities due to the COVID-19 crises. And now we are, forced to kind of put ourselves again at risk to be able to make sure that our voices are heard and that injustice is addressed. So there's a lot, and I apologize if that's scattered thoughts.
No, sir.
That's kind of where I am in trying to process the moment.
Okay. No, sir. This is an open discussion. And so, no, I don't think that you are scattered whatsoever. I think that you're speaking facts. And we need to hear that tonight before we go to everybody else. Pastor Payton, good evening, sir. You also have a unique position as you serve as a senior pastor, but you also work with Ebony Foundation. What is your position at this point? What's going on?
Well, I certainly, first of all, let me say thank you, Dr. Tolbert, for convening this distinguished panel of guests tonight. I'm honored to be a part and to share in the dialogue and the conversation. I think that Pastor Q is dead on with respect. I think his message was very succinct and clear as it relates to the fact that we are in a pandemic and the coronavirus and COVID-19 has devastated the African American community. The statistical data is out, and we understand the significant numbers of African Americans who have been adversely affected by this pandemic. And I think that as we focus on the reality of what COVID has done in disproportionately not only infecting the lives of Black and Brown people, but also taking the lives of Black and Brown people, I think we need to really focus on the reality of Black lives mattering. And I think that what we are seeing, in addition to the lack of response in urban communities with respect to providing adequate resources, testing, PPE, and other resources that our communities need to safeguard ourselves so that we might remain safe during this pandemic, are clearly being ignored. And I think that the reality that we see with George Floyd and so many others that's transpiring, particularly in this, I'm CNN is in the background here, and I've been watching this, all day closely, and I'm just appalled at some of the other news channels that are grossly reporting on focusing on the looting and the response of the protesters while ignoring the reality that Black lives have been lost. And I think that the anger and the frustration that we're seeing as a response to this, while certainly we don't promote or advocate violence in any type of a way, violence, whether it's to individuals or property, we don't promote those things. But certainly we all understand the human sentiment and emotion of anger. And oftentimes when we are angry and when we are frustrated, Moses struck the rock. Consequently, obviously, he didn't make it to the promised land, but that's a human emotion. And while we don't promote it, while we don't advocate for it, we certainly understand it. And so we're seeing that, here on the screens. And I think that COVID-19 provides us with a rich opportunity to look at a number of reforms that really need to take place with respect to policies that adversely affect our communities. And I think that the COVID-19 crisis, as well as what we're seeing in Minnesota and even in other states, only highlight the reality that we need to focus on policy reform and make certain that our communities, the African American communities, are safe, and we have a right to preserve life, even in our own communities. And people should be more important than personal possessions and property.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. All right. So we are here. This is the, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back, and his name is George Floyd. And people have been reacting, and we are all emotional. Everybody has some type of feeling about this. And I'm speaking as an African American male. I don't think we are okay. I'm not. I will openly admit today, I am not okay. I feel covered by the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. I have faith. But I have to openly admit to you all tonight that my second comfort is that I have a privilege to serve as a chaplain for one of our agencies. And I get the opportunity to, yes, have a badge. And in being stopped, that has been a blessing to me. Everybody that is African American, all African American males do not have that privilege. They do not have that outlet. And so tonight we have Officer Jared Wamble, who serves one of our Michigan agencies. He has great experience in other agencies, and I'm not mentioning those agencies. He's certainly welcome to do that if he's so inclined tonight. But Officer Wamble, good evening.
Thanks, sir.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so, sir, we have seen what has transpired with George Floyd, and I think that we need to hear from the police. And
Sure.
in the sense of, is it right? Is it justifiable? Are the charges that have been given from yourself, not only as a law enforcement officer, but as I'm labeling it tonight, as a Black law enforcement officer, are you satisfied?
Absolutely not. First and foremost, as a person of color raising a 5-year-old child, what I witnessed was absolutely deplorable. For a man to be on the ground, 4 officers surrounding him, 3 on his back, is totally egregious. That tells me that there was absolutely no control. But more importantly, the man was handcuffed. I'm going to say that again. The man was handcuffed on his chest, where all types of bad things can happen. Now, we have this thing here in Michigan called the force continuum. We avoid the head, we avoid the neck, we avoid the torso, we avoid the growing area. It's absolutely egregious, it's intolerable, and I don't think, in my opinion, the charges are appropriate. I think they should be a little more harsh based on the circumstances given.
All right. So now, from your position, sir, what happened? What do you feel happened? From a law enforcement eye, what happened?
Well, good pastor, after doing this job for nearly 21 years, there is a certain degree of emotion that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our emotions should never be this high where we can't perform the functions of our duties. We endure training for this. We go through a police academy. We go through rigorous training to deal with this. But more importantly, before we even get to that step, we're taught to deal with conflict resolution.
Yeah.
So that before I exert any type of force, before any force is ever used, I'm going to try to talk that individual down first. And if I can't get any response in verbally expressing, sir, do this, ma'am, do that, then we start thinking of some alternate actions that we can potentially take.
Okay. So do you feel like these officers or that particular officer felt a need to take this particular step? I mean, they have not released any of this information as of yet, but based off your professional background, do you feel that he in some way felt threatened?
I can't speak for what his actions were at that particular time and moment. However, how are we justifying a man laying on his torso, handcuffed, with his hands behind his back? How are you remotely threatened at that point in time? Because guess what? At that point, I've taken away the number one thing that I fear. These are the hands. Once your hands are placed behind your back, you're no longer a threat to me. The game is over.
Okay. And that's I think most Americans feel. Would everybody on the panel agree with that? I mean, he's in handcuffs. What I mean, Brandy, what is the
against
law?
one? Don't forget about that. 4 officers for one individual.
Yes.
Four, and you put your neck on this man's neck for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It's bad. I don't like it.
All right. So we know that this thing's been happening, and let me say what I'm gonna say about it, and I'm gonna get out everybody's way. I know that this type of behavior has been transpiring down through the years. The only difference now in 2020 is that we have social media. That's the only difference.
Absolutely.
And now we're able to see exactly what has been transpiring over the years. I know that they're trying to, and when I say they, I know that there are lawmakers, police officers trying to figure out a way how they can ban the use of cell phones when there is a detainment, not an arrest, but a detainment of any use. I know they're trying to figure it out, but right now, that's what I think is our saving grace. And so I pray that as our discussion continues this evening, I'm going to follow up with the main question here as we have been talking about George Floyd, but here it is. Do you think America fears the black man? And if so, why? And that's open to anybody who wants to answer.
Well, I'll start. First thing I'll say is, obviously you're absolutely correct that, this is nothing new. It's been going on and a real indictment to the injustice of our, criminal justice system and many times the engagement of law enforcement with our minoritized communities is the fact that this officer, had a documented record of engaging in unnecessary force and complaints with engaging with citizens, and the fact that he was able to maintain his job for this particular incident, I think even more forcefully helps us to see that this is some real systemic cultural issue that needs to be addressed. Now, your question about whether or not they fear the black man, I think is a very loaded question because, or whether they fear black people, I think is a very loaded question because the assumption is that they see us as people. And I think that really is where, the fractures that causes them to treat us in such an inhumane way comes because they do not see us as people. The founding of this country was really based upon African Americans being seen as subhuman, less than secondary citizens, and that still is deeply embedded in our culture. And so in many ways, I think that they use fear as a way to disguise what really is hatred.
Absolutely.
There is no real fear there because they know that they hold all of the wields of power. I mean, all of the structures of society is privileged towards them. What is to fear? But they utilize that in order to try to gain some sympathy or to give some pitiful explanation as to why they act in such an inhumane way. But underneath that disguise really is a blatant signal that they do not see us as human beings.
Absolutely.
And when you don't see a person as a human being, it's very difficult to treat them with the respect that they do deserve. And that is very clear. To hear a man crying for his life, this is the thing, and maybe Officer Wombley can talk about this. This is my understanding. Police officers are also first responders, right? And so if a person is in threat of their life or losing life, officers are required to, affirm life, to try to make sure that that person is protected, that their life is secure. And the fact that that officer used that opportunity to mock him, to tell him, well, why don't you get up there, while having his knee pressed down on his neck, like that's not fear. That's evil. That's demonic. That's satanic. To blatantly, while being a force to confront the fact that you're doing something wrong. I mean, you have bystanders. When you have civilians who are more responsible in protecting and serving the life of another constituent, then that really does, show that we have a long way to go in correcting the kind of issues that cause this to come to bear. And so I don't think that they fear us. Honestly, I don't think that they fear us. I think it's something a lot more evil than that. I think that that's a cop out and a disguise to make their actions seem more sympathetic. There's no fear there.
Absolutely. I like that.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that. I think what you just described, Q, is the pervasive reality, need, and desire for white supremacy and privilege. And outside of this case, I think even before the incident with George Floyd, I think it was almost an act of God that you had a black man and a white woman who were complete strangers but shared the same name, Cooper, in Central Park, New York City, where here this black man who has been perpetuated in white culture, white privilege, rather, culture and society, to be a threat to society, to be criminalized. We know the demonization of black men and the history and legacy of that in America. And here you have this black man who was in Central Park bird watching, and this white woman who was violating the law by not having her, dog on a leash. And when the African-American man expressed the fact that she was violating those rules with respect to leashing her dog, she felt threatened. She supposedly felt threatened, but she used her white privilege, and she knew she had white privilege, and weaponized her white privilege. And I think what we have seen with the weaponization of white privilege, we've seen that in historically, in the legacy of lynching, which has been a perpetuated cycle of instilling fear into African Americans because white privilege enabled lynchings. And what we saw, whether it was in the park, that was potentially a form of lynching. What we saw in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that was a form of lynching. What we see in excessive sentencing that disproportionately affects Black and brown men and women of color, those excessive sentences are forms of lynchings. And even though African Americans, and I guess recently there was a case of a brother who was strung up somewhere, I read within the past few months. But even though we're not seeing African American men and women swinging from trees as strange fruit today, the new strange fruit is the virtual lynchings that we see taking place. That the media is selective about the types of coverages with respect to cases that affect Black and brown people. We're right here in the city of Detroit. And more specifically, Dr. Tolbert, you and I are in Pontiac, and Reverend Kevin Clark, who is a native of our community and now pastors in the city of Detroit. In 2015, his son was pulled over by the police in a traffic stop. They suspected him for having drugs. His windows were tinted, too dark is what they said, but they forced him out of his vehicle, suspected that he had drugs in his vehicle, handcuffed him, put him down on the ground on his torso, and an officer sat on his back as he also said, "I can't breathe," and explained that he was severely asthmatic. He had an inhaler in his glove compartment that after searching his vehicle, after many complaints of him not being able to breathe, ultimately, this 24-year-old African-American man named Anthony Clark Reed in the city of Detroit just in 2015 died from suffocation in the custody of police officers. But no one has heard of Anthony Clark Reed and his suffocation in the hands of police custody. So I think we also have to, I think, Q, you're dead on with articulating the culture, the pervasive culture that has existed for many, many years in this country. And I think now people are beginning to wake up. The older generations, to some degree, I feel have ignored the reality of the pervasiveness of white supremacy and how it has been weaponized in our country to keep African Americans suppressed and oppressed in many types of ways. But we're now seeing that being played out, and younger generations are beginning to wake up to see the reality of these disparities. And that's why we're seeing in the streets of Minneapolis, these are not just Black and brown people who are in the streets. Primarily, these are our brothers and sisters who are Caucasian and of other ethnicities who are flooding these streets saying enough is enough. And what I would like to see, even moving beyond Minneapolis, Minnesota, is for our white brothers and sisters in other ethnicities who also realize the reality of this wicked evil that is transpiring in our midst to also be more vocal about these issues and concerns that are still plaguing our community.
I think your head on. I think your point on. We're talking about the new form of lynching. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I want to ask Brandy. Brandy is our sister on this evening, and Brandy, while you may not have the emotions of an African American male, what is your position? Do you feel like this is a reality, or how do you feel about that? This question, per se.
So I did defer to the African American men to answer that question. But as a mother of two little Black boys, I think the fear for me is within me, right? That I have to raise two Black men in a society that's not going to value their greatness. That's going to be threatened by any sense of them becoming great, right? And so I think that I do think fear is a cop-out, but I don't think it's necessarily do people fear the Black man. I think they fear what they can lose to the Black man. Mm-hmm. Allowing the Black man to have greatness is power that they don't want to give up. And so I don't necessarily think that it's fearing them. It's fearing what is to lose to them. And so a lot of, systematically, it's historic. And this comes from time that the power has never been in our hands as Black people. The power has never been in the hands of a Black man. And so when you are put in a position in which that a Black man can have power, the fear is of that power, not of him, but of your loss of the power to him.
Absolutely.
I think it's difficult, as a mother, trying to raise boys and train boys and think about you're going to have to interact with the police one day. I want to make sure that you get home to me. And those are not things that I feel like, we should have to go through life preparing our children to be able to say, how do I remain safe in interacting with the people who are supposed to protect me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to ask Officer Wamba in a moment to talk about that. Dr. Davidson, you're in the South. I know a lot of people don't consider Florida to be the South, but Florida is the South. And your history, you grew up in Alabama. We are in Michigan, and we know what we feel is racism, what we have experienced as racism. But you are in the South, the heart of racism. How do you feel this question should be addressed from your perspective, or from the being in the South?
I must say that these have been some phenomenal responses, and I have to go with, I'm not sure that it's about fear. When you start to think about this whole racial idea, I think it's about hatred. When you fear something, you try to avoid it. If you're afraid of something, you try to avoid it at all costs. But if you hate something, you seek to destroy it. And I'll use a biblical perspective. I've been studying the life of Paul. And when you read in Acts 7, Acts 8, Acts 9, his whole intent was to kill people of the way. So much so, he hated them so much that he went from door to door, dragging them out. Listen to what he did. Went to door, dragging them out so that he could ultimately take them out. Go to Acts chapter 9. He's breathing out threatenings and slaughter or murder. So if you hate something, you want to literally destroy it. If you fear something, you want to avoid it. I am convinced there are people who literally hate us. Now, why they hate us is the real question. But fear us, I used to say, yeah, they fear us. No, they hate us. They perhaps may fear what God has deposited in us for this level of greatness, because I think we're great people. But I think they hate us. They hate the very idea of who we are as people. And again, as I've heard several of the presenters say, when you don't see us as human, you won't treat us like human. When you see us as less than, and as our country was built on that reality, and I've said this a multiplicity of times, when you think of the level of hatred that one would have for us, and being from the South and studying historically how we've been treated, but the racial reality is across this nation. So it's not just the South. I mean, it's just reality. I mean, I think the hatred is just as strong in Detroit as it is in Alabama, just being honest with you. That hatred is just real, but I think it's something that is taught, that's developed, that's given, because I don't think people just naturally, little children, they like each other until they are taught to hate each other and then just have this disdain for one another. So what we're seeing now, I think, is it's been happening all the time. It's being videoed, it's being broadcast, and now you have 6 people on here who are intellectuals. This is what they never wanted to happen. That we could meticulously and analytically pick them apart and be able to say, this is wrong, that's what you're doing wrong. We know what's going on. We know, and they hate the fact that we know what's going on, because I just believe that officer never expected it to happen like this. It was never supposed to get this big. I mean, surely he wouldn't have carried that out to this point if he thought it was going to get this far. Did he want to do what he did? I think so. Did he wanted to get exposed like this? I doubt very seriously that this is the level of exposure he was expecting. Perhaps he thought it would be brushed under the rug like so many other instances. And I heard the officers share. Those are not, when I hear officers, I mean, they do this every day and they are categorically opposed to what they have seen. That speaks volumes. I mean, I'm not an officer. I'm not a person that's in law enforcement. But when I hear a law enforcement servant leader emphatically say that was all wrong, how do we get away from that? So it says to me that this racial issue we have, it's been brewing, if you will. And I honestly think that it's been brewing for ever since the beginning for us. But when President Obama became the president, they got big mad. And now that President Trump is president, they're able to live out their reality because he condones all the behavior. Think about this now. It was not long ago he talked about this brute force that should be used against people. Few weeks ago in Michigan, people in the state building, and they're considered good people. Now these people who are protesting, they're considered thugs. Colin Kaepernick kneels peacefully. He is demeaned. This man puts his knee on puts his knee on a man's neck, and we hear silence. You tell me that's a problem. And again, when the leader at the top, I'm like this. the organization. However the leader is, so goes the organization. Our country is flowing with its leadership. And not just the president, but when you start thinking about state attorneys, it's deeper than just the national leadership. That's why it's imperative that we vote for state attorneys. We vote for public defenders. We vote for mayors. We vote for commissioners, because it's those persons on that local level that we have to be able to go to and say, you need to handle this. The president is going to tweet and do what he does. But it's when we as pastors, leaders, attorneys can walk and knock on the door of that state attorney and say, we want to see something happen expeditiously. We want to see, when you talk to the chief of police, when you talk to the sheriff, those individuals in our local communities can affect change. And we've got to help our people understand, if we don't cast our vote, that's a vote of silence. So, I'm not saying I'm for or against burning the building down. But what I will say is, it's the reality. When you will not hear people, watch this, if Colin Kaepernick's protest was ignored, that was peaceful, quiet. If the peaceful, quiet protest was ignored, well, guess what? The opposite is going. Well, now we're going to go all the way. And if we burn the buildings down, will you pay us attention? So which one do you do? If I'm quiet and if I'm peaceful, you won't respond. Now that I get loud and boisterous, and you see this destruction happening, then you hear the president extract the words from the ancient rhetoric of a Miami police chief. When there's looting, there is shooting. Man, that's egregious kind of talk from a leader. So racism for me is as real in the South, the North, East, West. It's real for us all over the country, because I think we're just hated people for whatever reason. And it perhaps because we become too smart, too educated, too in tune, too learned, too smooth, too whatever, that now we can handle a conversation with people that they never expect. That's why they didn't want us to read. That's why they didn't want us to learn, because they knew one day this day would happen.
Absolutely. And I think it's important also to know that there are just so many, getting some feedback. There's so many other examples that are coming to us in our social media accounts, where we see how they treat white individuals, how they arrest white individuals, individuals that have openly. I mean, somebody sent me one today where it's a young man in a car. They trying to pull him out the car, and why are you touching him? I mean, at this point, they're literally pulling him out the car. Ain't nobody shot him. Ain't nobody tased him. Then they get him on the ground. He take their nightstick. He's beating them with the nightstick. Ain't nobody shot him. Ain't nobody tased him. Then he gets up, gets in the police car, drives off in the police car, and still weapons are holstered. Nobody shot him. Nobody tased him. No call for backup. So, Officer Womble, I mean, when we see all of these inconsistencies, and I'm sorry, Officer Mr. Womble, is it Detective Womble at this point?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, that's what I thought. Jared and I go back a long ways, and so Detective Womble, I mean, how do we deal with, as the public? How does law enforcement expect us as the public to deal with all of these inconsistencies?
Well, let's back up, Pastor. In 2020, we having a conversation about policing in the United States of America. That's a problem in itself, where if you go back categorically, law enforcement was thought of as the good guys. We're the go-to people. We're the problem solvers. We're the fixers. That's taking a back seat now. But I think what we have to get back to, and this is where we have fallen short, is the community standpoint. We have to get back into the community. So when we interact with the community, not saying that a George Floyd would not take place, the probability is lessened because we know the neighborhoods, we know the people. So we got to get back to our grassroots. We got to get back to the things that got us to where we're at today, the trust, the public trust. And at the end of the day, when these officers are violating the law, there has to be a sense of accountability. It has to be.
All right. So at this point, right now, we're talking solutions. How do we stop police officers, white police officers, black police officers from killing black men? How do we stop it?
Pastor,
is it training? I mean, what do we have to do?
We receive my employer, the Southfield Police Department. I like to look at us as being the model police agency. We're one of the greatest police departments. Chief Barron makes sure that his individual officers go through countless training. We have 40-hour block training each year. We deal with cultural diversity. So we are doing the things that are necessary to prevent these types of things from happening. But, again, I'm going to, hone in on accountability. You have to look, first of all, we have to do a better job in the vetting process. But even with the vetting process, there are going to be some individuals that fall through the cracks. And what we have to do, we have to monitor these problematic officers. When Miss Jenkins comes into the police station and she wants to make a complaint, we have to follow that pattern. And we have an obligation on leadership to hold these individuals when there is a breach of trust accountable.
All right. So I hear that. And Detective Wamba, you and I, we grew up in the same neighborhood.
Sure.
And I recall some instances where we had an opportunity to experience diverse relationships with more than just African Americans. And my mother, who was from the South, when we would hang with certain people, she would say, okay, just be careful. In a way, now that I look back on it, in a way that was different from, okay, y'all have a good time and be careful. It was different when she said, y'all be careful, when we were engaged in diverse relationships. Later on, I asked her about that, and it came from the fact that she basically said to us, when you understand that people that hate you or the people that you're hanging with, their parents hated us or their grandparents hated us. That is taught, that is passed down. And so while we out, in somebody's driveway playing basketball or going old school TL 12 mall hanging out, something like that, right? Going to Northland, going to Fairlane. She's understanding it from a different lens. She's seeing their parents. She's seeing their grandparents. She's seeing their great grandparents. And just like we learned all the things that we've learned that have been passed down to us through our traditions, through our experiences, our customs, she believes that racism was passed down, was taught. And so while, in the name of diversity, we out having a good time, we in a little melting pot. We got A wing, B wing, C wing, and D wing, right? But sure. She's seeing it from a bigger picture that is coming to reality at this point. And I think, of course, again, it is about social media. So I'm saying to you as a law enforcement professional, it's not the training. It is something more systemic than that. And what is the solution? It can't just be training because we've been doing training. And I also want to say that I'm pro police officer. I love officers in our department, in the Detroit Police Department, Southfield Police Department, Oakland County Sheriff. I work with these police officers, men and women. And so, I believe in protecting the badge. I believe that police officers, their number one responsibility when they come off the ramp is we got to get home. If I'm riding with them, chap, we're going to get you back today. We all coming back. And I understand that there may be some, levels of emotion that are involved in traffic stops and altercations or what have you, but it's beyond training. It's beyond training. So I need to, maybe there's someone else who wants to respond to that, but it's got to be beyond training.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with you, Dr. Tolbert, that it's beyond training, particularly because we can't start early enough. I mean, I don't know how many hours or days or times that officers have to put in order to get their certification in those trainings. But that's after most of these individuals have spent a lifetime in being conditioned in order to see minoritized individuals in the way that they have been conditioned throughout their life. And then not even to talk about the embedded kind of historical conditioning over the centuries of that kind of being embedded in the DNA about how we interact with each other. And so I'm actually very challenged. Last time we talked with each other, Dr. Tolbert, you know, I was making this a very profound statement about gradualism versus radicalism, and how, you know, in our current context, you know, we have gotten very comfortable with gradualism, taking a little bit at a time, as opposed to making the more radical things. And in that way, that's where I'm problematized, because I think that in our community, we need to reclaim the spirit of abolition. I think we need to go back to an abolitionist mindset as opposed to a reformation mindset. I'm just really challenged, you know, in trying to figure out how to tinker at a system that at its founding was corrupt. At its founding, it was evil. I mean, the police, law enforcement kind of agency and concept comes out of the fugitive slave catchers, you know, and then it is built off of kind of the vagrancy laws. I mean, the whole kind of environment in which policing and law enforcement was born in this country is poison. The well was poisoned. And I think that what is driving us insane is that we're attempting to try to purify water that's poisoned. We're attempting to try to reform something that, you know, in its core is rotten. And so, you know, I'm really praying about how we can get, you know, to an abolitionist mindset where we don't kind of tinker around the edges, but we do a total overhaul. Because again, my only real, you know, suggestion to how we can stop them from killing us is we got to start when they're children. We have to start grooming our children from birth to step into the role of law enforcement. The expectations that we have about how they engage with the community, so that, again, there is a lifetime of experiences that comes to bear when they police, as opposed to something that comes in training. Because many of you all know, like, training is one thing, but then you have to deal with instincts, right? And when you're in a moment when instincts come to bear, a lot of those tacit, unconscious, latent biases, prejudices, bigotry comes up. And I think many of them are surprised. I'm actually, you know, I get kind of, you know, tickled a bit, you know, thinking about when they come back and apologize, you know, like the apology after the fact. And then they come into this great profundity, like, oh, that's not me. I just didn't know where that came from. Well, we know where it came from. It came from generations of that being embedded in their culture, conditioning from their childhood, that it shocks them, you know, when it comes out, because they didn't know that it was there. And so, again, I'm challenged by, you know, how, and let me say this, and I'll give it up. I'm challenged, you know, by how we reform, you know, policing to ensure that they don't kill us. Because I think the thing that exhausts us is, like, is that our job? Is it our job to do the work to ensure that they don't kill us? It's like counseling someone who is in an intimate, violent relationship, and you put it on the person who has been victimized, the one who is being beaten and abused in the relationship, to fix their abuser. Like, I mean, how insane is that? That in this kind of context, here we are, the ones that we're paying them to protect us, and yet we're trying to figure out ways to accommodate whatever kind of latent issues that they have in order to ensure that a simple engagement with a law enforcement officer. We're talking about loose cigarettes here. We're talking about alleged a fraudulent $10 bill. Like, when that ends up in the loss of life, I mean, that's a real issue that I don't know if little tinkering can really help. Because I think, again, at its core, and no offense to Detective Wombly, and no offense to any officer who takes their you know, vow seriously, but at its core, law enforcement in the American context is rotten.
But
It is
Q,
rotten.
I want to challenge you a little bit, Q, because you earlier in your discourse, you talked about the getting back to an abolitionist mindset, right? Well, when you talk about an abolitionist mindset, I think about an abolitionist movement, right? When we were able to be liberated from various forms of oppression and injustices, there were movements that helped us through those various periods.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing about those movements is that they were not lacking in organizational structure and strategy. And what I will certainly, as in this pursuit of equity and justice in 2020 and beyond, in as much as we must do the work of holding our elected officials and police officers and others accountable for their actions, I do think that we have a responsibility as a people to organize ourselves and to do the hard work of rolling up our sleeves to develop an infrastructure such that when these types of atrocities are happening, we're not just reacting, but we have a system that is strategic and methodical and organized in order to be able to get us the victories and the policy wins that we know that we need. And I'll say this, we, all of us here, I don't know my sister well or Brother Womley, but if they are friends of JT, I'm hoping they know the Lord. And so I'm assuming that all of us here know the Lord. And Raphael Warnock's book is in my mind, The Divided Mind of the Black Church, to the extent that, we read this Bible and we celebrate its spiritual uplift that it provides for us, etc. But one of the things that we don't really take note of is the fact that the Bible is filled with the systemic oppression and atrocities that were transpiring in the lives of the Hebrew Israelites. But as we look at the Jewish community today, my background, for a short stint, I was very involved with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is the third most powerful lobby organization in the country. And one thing I can say about our Jewish brothers and sisters, even though they too are minority, and to a large extent, they have certainly benefited from white privilege because they were able to blend into the dominant culture in that way. But one thing about the Jewish community is that they are very well organized. Anytime there's an issue of anti-Semitism, they're on it, and they move very methodically. And it's about organizing not just people, but also organizing our finances and our money that we just do not do well. I was very happy with the University of Minnesota, I believe it was, when they ended the contract with the police department of Minneapolis. They said, you know what, we are paying you guys to provide a service, and if you're not going to be treating people with fairness and justice and equity, we're not going to continue to finance you. And so I think we as a community must hold ourselves accountable. And I think we as clergy have a responsibility that we too are holding ourselves accountable and responsible, one, to the call that God has given us, but also to the people that God has given us stewardship over their lives. And so as much as I am very angry, my emotions have been high because I'm dealing with not only the George Floyd issue and the Anthony Clark Reed issue, the Kwame Kilpatrick issue. I mean, the litany of Black lynchings in the past 30 days has been extraordinary. And so my emotions as a Black man in America, I am completely outraged. As much as I am outraged with those officers, I'm also outraged with our community who blindly elect officials and elected leaders who don't have a clue about policies and procedures, but because we like them or because they come to our churches and come to our anniversaries, we support persons, in political office. And these are people who are actually developing the policies by which we actually live.
I agree with that, but Pastor, that's where we got to move. We got to move forward into dealing with that today, and that's what I want us to start wrapping up on, is real solutions, real solutions. What do we tell people like Brandy, and who has young sons, African American sons? I think that it is imperative that we as community leaders, whether we be in Michigan or Florida or wherever we are, because others are watching tonight, uh, I think down through the years we have addressed how we should engage when we are detained by police. We've talked about that openly. I think that it should become a part of what we pass down. Now, I have my standard procedure, and my question is going to be to you: have you ever been profiled? And yes, I have been profiled.
Yes, I have.
We live in the suburbs of Southeast Michigan. Yes, I've been profiled. I was profiled at the border, going into Canada,
Yep.
with my mother at the time, and the officer asked me, "What do you do for a living?" What? You can't ask what business? What do you do for a living? Well, that's neither here nor there. And then, of course, going back and forth on Telegraph Road and on Woodward through our upper echelon of suburbs, if you will. Yes, I have been profiled. Here's my procedure, and I don't know what yours is. You can share that tonight. Stop the car. Turn off the car. Take my foot off of the brake. Roll all of the windows down. Open up the sunroof. Yeah. That's right. If it's in the night, turn the lights on, and then put my hands outside of the window until approached by the officer. Now, of course, once that has happened and they ask me for ID, I ask for permission. May I reach for my ID?
Have that before they come to the door.
Well, see, sometimes I don't want to be reaching while I'm pulling over. That's my issue. Officer Wambo, is there a standard? What makes you safe? And I know you can't speak for a white police officer. I'm not asking you to. And maybe we could have had a white police officer on tonight, but I need to know. Other parents need to know. What do they tell their not just their boys, but to their girls when they get pulled over? What do they tell their children when they get pulled over? What is the standard procedure? What's gonna make you safe so that they get home at night and you all as police officers get home at night?
Sure, Pastor Tolbert, I think you hit on all bullet points. If I had to add a caveat to that, hands on the steering wheel, have the driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance at the ready. And like you indicated and like you alluded to, should you need to maneuver to the glove box, should you need to maneuver to another compartment, advise that officer, sir, ma'am, I have the additional paperwork in my glove compartment or in my center console. May I reach for it? So I think those scenarios right there will play a huge factor.
All right. Is it fair that there's a difference? Is it fair that there's a difference between blacks and whites when detainment takes place?
Of course not. Of course it's not fair. I'm over here, I'm bubbling up, because all of this is wonderful. It's our tried and true lines. It's what we've been giving each other for decades. I mean, and it's not working.
It's not working. So, but we still, while there's policy, there's policy, right? There is policy. I get that. While we do need to deal with the politician, I get that. But we need some practical resources. We need some practical responses.
But this is the thing that I'm challenged by, right? Because what we're preparing for is to perpetuate that these conversations are necessary, right? That is the reform versus the abolition of it, right? And it as the whole overturning of it. It's like, how do we perfect the conversation so that we're better at dealing with the opposition that we face from our law enforcement officers when we shouldn't have to deal with it at all. And I want to clarify something, because I don't want anyone to assume that, what I'm promoting is fatalism or some sense of being lazy. No, I mean, I think that, what is that? Physics tells us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, just transferred one to another, and you only have a limited amount of energy. So it's about the deployment of that energy. And so when it comes to our community, I get frustrated that we have to deploy so much of our energy, not on internal organizing, thinking about what visions we have for our community, but we have to direct that energy to try to help somebody else with their evil, right? And that's where when I was talking about the abolitionist mindset, yeah, abolitionists organized, but they weren't organizing to work with the slave masters to make the working conditions more favorable. No, they were working to eliminate the system of slavery altogether. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like not saying giving up or not doing the work, but refocusing how we are directing our energies. Is it going to be the tinkerist system that in its creation is operating the way it's been created to operate? Or do we dismantle it completely and envision a new world, a new way of us engaging with each other? And again, I mean, that really is fortified and fueled by my faith. Again, that last conversation that we had, sometimes I think we think God is small. We ask for too little. Like, God is a big God, a revolutionary God, a radical God. And I think that sometimes we settle for what is possible. I think that comes out of that Neberism, that Christian realism. You know, you got to work with what you have, sure, as opposed to envisioning something that is beyond, so that we're not perpetually having this conversation. Because look, y'all, we had this conversation 40 years ago. And the thing that will drive me completely mad is that 40 years from now, there's another, I don't know if it'll be Zoom or what was this, StreamYard, and these same conversations to be had. Somewhere, some way, we have got to get ready to dismantle the system. Let me say this, and I know I've been talking way too much. Let me say this. My life changed around this issue when I went to a event at Alex Haley's farm. It was hosted by the Children Aid Society. And Dr. Otis Moss Jr. was giving a presentation. And in this presentation, he just randomly kind of stumbled upon Paul and Silas in the Roman jail, right? And he talked about Paul and Silas being in Roman jail, and he talked about being in the middle of the jail, and they prayed and they praised, and the chains fell off and the gates opened. And he's telling this story, and as he's telling the story, this is the line that he got me. He said, but the building was still standing. The jail was still standing. And he was talking about how we as Christians, we get so excited that if you get released, that we don't talk about the structures that exist that still stand. And if we don't really shift our mindset to talking about the structures as opposed to making these interpersonal engagements, then we really will miss our opportunity to be radical. And so it's not only about Paul and Silas being released from the jail, but the jail needs to come down. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with the, you know, the abolition.
Well, that's what they was trying to do last night in Minneapolis. They was trying to bring the whole jail down. So, and you know, I have to be honest with you. I have never been the guy to be out front when it comes to our social justice, so to speak. I am that, you know, pro reserved, conservative
mediator.
Yeah, there you go. And so, but this is the first time I'm not in that position where I'm saying, hey, all right, everybody be cool. There's a better way. The Lord gonna fix it. No, I don't feel like that today. I done crossed over, Reverend. I'm ready. I'm like,
we see you got your military shirt on tonight.
Yeah, man. I'm like, I want some. Say something to me.
Ain't spiritual warfare. This is.
I done drove up my street. I done had the windows down, looking at all of the Caucasians. Like, come on, say something. You better be nice to me today. You bet. That's right. No pedestrian crossing. Let me pass first.
But JT, let me ask Officer Womley a question. And I know we got to get Brandy in and Dr. Davidson. But you asked him a question about I can't remember what it was, but Q said absolutely, of course not, right? Whatever that question was.
Is it unfair that there's a different standard between white people and black people?
So my question to you, Officer Womley, is Womble, is it even what policy even allows? So it's a twofold question. Number one, what policies even allow in your training for an officer to put his knee on another human being's neck in the manner of which the officer did in the Floyd case? Is that even? Are you guys trained to do something like that?
Absolutely not. That is not in the police officer's handbook. That is, to be honest with you, that is a police officer who went rogue, who did things his way. Clearly, that is not in line with how we do business.
Now, so, I want to get back to
if something had happened, if a bystander had said, you know what, enough of that is enough. You're killing this man, and I mean, I'm wondering what would I have done if I saw that. Of course, we all got these visions of what we would do now that the situation is over. But if I was in that situation, if I was literally standing, I cannot say in my right mind that I would have let that police officer kill that man.
But here's the thing though, and that's why we have to ask the right questions. Going back to what you just mentioned, Q, we don't often ask the right questions. So if an officer is doing something in public view, then we have to ask the question, in addition to the fact that he might have just, been on his white supremacy, whatever. But even with that, knowing that he had an audience, knowing that he was on camera, what else? And this is where the system or the jail that needs to be burned down, not literally, but the structure that provides him cover for his actions is the legal immunity, right? So
that's true.
He has done these egregious things 18 times and has gotten away with it, right? So there's a structure of policy called legal immunity that gives him cover to make him feel like he can do whatever he wants. And
so that's where we get charges but no convictions.
Are giving these people cover. That's the jails that we need to be destroying. And it's not literally burning down the jailhouse in Minneapolis. It's burning down the structure of legal immunity that gives this officer cover to make him feel like he can do whatever he wants he can do.
Well, we're around the horn now, so I'm gonna stop you. Hey, that's what I'm talking about, though, man. Listen, why is it that we will charge these individuals, but we don't get no convictions? I mean, Brandy, is there a reason in the legal system that we're able to charge them but not get any convictions?
So you're probably not gonna like my response to that question, and I'm here to probably take the unpopular stance on that. Is I think that it all goes back to that accountability, right? Accountability for those officers, but accountability for ourselves. How many of us go and sit on juries?
Right.
How many of us are the ones that are there to be the fact finders in the situation? Because the charges come because a prosecutor has looked at it, applied the law to the evidence that's been presented to them in charge. But then the power goes to that jury to convict. And if we don't take responsibility in being part of our communities, responding to jury duty, sitting on those juries, and coming back to say, I, as a juror, am going to take a stance here, then we got to have some personal accountability in all of this too. So when it's, why don't we get convictions? It is, the evidence is the evidence. And as a prosecutor, I'm prosecuting the case based on the evidence that is presented to me. But what happens to that is then outside of my realm. I have presented the evidence to the trier of fact. And that's you. If you want accountability in that, then you need to be sitting on those panels and you need to be sitting in those grand juries to return indictments to say that we need some accountability here.
All right, so Brandy, you opened up this can. I wasn't gonna say nothing about that. Now you done told everybody you're a prosecutor. Now what do we need? You've got to tell us tonight. What do we need to do besides sit on the jury? I mean, do we need to submit our video evidence? What are some other standards that we can have in place so that we can move to getting convictions beyond charges?
So I do think that the sitting on the jury, returning to that is kind of how you are empowered, right? But in addition to that, I mean, when we talk about a legal system, people are elected. The people who make decisions are elected. You need to be voting for these people. You need to be informed in your voting when you're making these votes. And I will say, in addition to that, there was video. I will tell you, I did not, over all of these incidents over the past few weeks, I have not watched all of these videos in the entirety just because of sheer exhaustion of having to do this so many times, right?
Sure.
But going back to what you said, somebody stood with a camera for 9 minutes while this man was losing his life. 9 minutes. And I'm just standing here and recording. And I think it's more than just, well, I got it on tape. Because having it on tape doesn't matter once the life is lost, right?
That's
and
true.
So I'm not saying that I have the solution of what to do in that moment, right? How do you react in that moment? What do you do? I mean, I think, if we could all look back on it, maybe things would be different. But I do think that, as much as we can say, you know, these things aren't happening and this isn't justice, it's just us, I will implore us to take some accountability to be a part of the solution.
Okay. All right. So as we're standing there in that situation, I think self-preservation is going to be priority. If I discharge my weapon for that to break that situation up, now I become primary target.
Oh,
If I go and tackle this officer, now I become primary target. You know, we may save his life, but I may lose mine in the process.
You may lose yours in the process. But so
exactly. And it almost would be justifiable.
I thought through like how I would have reacted in that moment, right? And your gut is, let's just say, obviously the police are here, right? These are the people I'm supposed to be able to call in the moments when I need help. But right. Was there a phone? I mean, and I don't know, like, I'm not saying that these are the right answers, right? But I said to myself, is it a phone call to that station to say, you have officers out here acting outside of the scope of their duties? Is it a conversation to 911 that says, this looks like it's about to get out of control, get an ambulance here now? You know, officers weren't in that moment trying to get an ambulance there because that man lay lifeless before an ambulance showed up. I don't know what the answers to those questions are. True. But in those moments, just personally, my reaction is, I'm not saying go jump in it because then you lose life, as you said, but what can I do more than just stand there and record?
Officer Womble, Dr. Davidson, we want to hear from the two of you. What do the Kappas have to say about this situation?
Well, I wouldn't encourage public to intervene in a law enforcement situation. I would never advocate that. Like Ms. McMillan alluded to, definitely get on the phone, call 911, request a supervisor. Request a supervisor, make the location, make the scene. But I would never advocate that citizens with no training start intervening in law enforcement tactics. I just think that's bad.
All right. So you can't call the police on the police?
Well, you can certainly request a supervisor make the location. Absolutely. Call in the 911, let 911 dispatch know what's going on. Request some additional cars. Absolutely. You can do that.
Well, Jared, I just want to say I feel like Malcolm X in this moment. That I'm just not satisfied with that. I just ain't satisfied with that tonight. We got to have more. Well, I ain't got time to get on no phone and call no supervisor. And this man is sitting here dying in front of. I mean, it's broad daylight. This ain't happening in the night. But Dr. Davidson.
But you know, I want to respond to Pastor Payton and Pastor Presley because they made some good comments, but also to what my frat just said. I think what's important, what he is saying, I think it goes back what Payton said earlier about structure. It may seem minuscule, but if we as pastors develop relationships with those captains and sergeants that are responsible for those areas, if people can structure, if they can call and say, hey, Pastor, we see a situation out of hand, can you call or text so-and-so? You text them, perhaps that could start some traction and movement. I know that's a short window, but I think the moment we start seeing that, we have a plan that's in place, which I think could be helpful at best, you know, because I don't know if we do have the right solution. But then something Peyton said earlier about putting together a structure and how do we really affect change? I believe this, whenever we direct our dollars, we can determine our destiny.
I like that. It's the money. That money.
If you go back to the Montgomery bus boycott, do you know what happened? When they started to direct their dollars, they determined the destiny.
Yes, sir.
At the end of the day, when that money started getting out of those pockets, they said, put Negroes on the bus, put anybody who want to get on the bus on that bus, let them sit anywhere. Because if you want to get people's attention, you can tear up the building, burn down the building, because they figure we're going to stop doing that in a few days. But when you systematically organize and say, every person in this city, we're not going to shop at this place, not going to spend our money. When you start reaching up to CEOs and CFOs, and when their bottom line is affected, and they know it's directly because of how we have determined. Now, that's us finding the kind of leadership to unify our people to say, if you're really tired, you change that by changing the bottom line for people. When you take money out of people's pockets, you'll have CEOs stepping to the table saying, hey, you know what? Something has to be different. Something has to change. And then, hold on, I'll go back to what Attorney Brandy just said. You know, we got to stop. How many people have you heard? Man, I got jury duty, but I'm going to find a way to get out of jury duty. I mean, and then what we get mad at the attorneys and the legal system. Not saying it's perfect, but we bear some responsibility. I'm going to figure a way to get out of jury duty. Well, I'm going to get on every jury that I love being on jury duty, and I will hang a jury in a minute if I don't feel the facts are cool. I'm just not going to arbitrarily say, oh, guilty. Not if I don't see it's panning out like it should. So we have to. It's about structure and systems. We have to put legitimate structure and systems across the nation. It can't be just Detroit is locked. That's good. Every city, we have to find people who can get over themselves and stop wanting to be, I'm in charge. And again, as President said, it's bad. We got to fix somebody else's evil.
True.
But again, the Jews had it right. You see what they do? They spend their money with their people. And guess what? You're not getting into that community and into their dollars. They control political arenas. They control, trust me, in Fort Lauderdale, in Jewish City, when I tell you, judges matter, police officers matter, state attorneys matter, public defenders matter, clerk of the court matters. Supervisor of elections matter. Every one of those individuals, if we don't vote again, I think it starts locally. You put the right people in your local community in position. Forget what the president is doing. When I can go downtown and knock on the state attorney's office and say, you need to do something. When I can go to the public defender's office and say, what's going on? That's a game changer. But if you have a system and a structure in place, so guess what? Start affecting dollars in your own community. If you start taking money out of people's pockets, and then we start getting, oh, you can't tell me how to spend my money. You can't. Okay, so if we continue to spend it, they don't care, because they don't care about us tearing up our own stuff. It's when we take our dollars and direct them a certain way, and then we determine what the outcome is, and then structurally, systematically put policies in place that we expect with tangible expectations, with legitimate objectives, with legitimate executable outcomes, and say, if we choose to endorse you, this is what we expect once we endorse you. If you do not do what we're expecting you to do, then you won't get reelected. Our voice and our vote matters.
I agree with that.
We have the ability, and you know what? That's why we're disenfranchised with voting, because they know if we ever collectively and collaboratively come together, we change the game. If we ever have our money a certain way, we change the game. I mean, think about it. We'll give you $1,200, open the salons up and the barbershops up in the shoe store. And guess what? We lined up to get some joints. Man, I'm done. Man, forget it. I mean, come on.
Dr. Davidson, I mean, you present a great argument, but how, and I want you all to get your questions ready. Everybody that's watching, we're going to open up for questions for about 10 minutes. But I need you, Dr. Davidson, or others who've heard what Dr. Davidson just said. How do we translate that to law enforcement? How do we affect the bottom line for the police officers? How do we do that?
You see what the University of Minnesota did?
Yeah.
So our church, for example, we pay law enforcement weekly to come. And I'm sure there are other people who pay law enforcement. So if you say, if you're going to keep paying them, we're not going to spend money with you. Well, can you imagine if we find out everybody is spending money with an agency that's not treating us fairly, and we start going to those different entities and saying, we're not going to spend money with these entities because they support activities that are counterproductive to our community. That affects. So you're telling me University of Minnesota not spending that money? Now that police department has to find another avenue to use because that's been in their budget.
Yeah.
So again, what changes anybody's life more? Money is the game changer. Yeah. I mean, that's why Black people have been struggling so long. We keep money out your hand. War on poverty was never a war on poverty. It's a war on the Negro. So guess what? We're going to give you some money. We're going to let you have money. But guess what? You got to have all these babies, but you better not have a man in the house. War on drugs. We're going to start, ain't no war on drugs. It's war on Negroes. And every war on something is a war on us. And until we see it like that. So I think it starts with the incremental changes, as Peyton and Pressy said, you know what? Let's start some structure. Let's start tearing down the building metaphorically. How do we do that? If each one of us got us 5 or 10 people and say, let's start this. It's a small, we think that we have to do it big overnight. It's like investing. Small amount over time grows. Small incremental changes that we make in our own local communities and our own circles with our own people. And this starts a groundswell that starts to spiral all over. I mean, Greek organizations, church organization, business. We have to get all of these entities to start in small incremental ways of systematically saying, we're not going to do X. We're not going to spend here. This is how we're going to move. That, to me, affects change in a way that we can see. That's what happened. The Montgomery bus boycott, it didn't start with buses all over the country. Right there in Montgomery. Look what happened. Everywhere starts. So
no, you answered that question though. How to translate it? You got to find out who pays the police departments, and then you start boycotting those individuals. That will definitely affect that financial position. I like that.
And I don't say this against people like Womble, because again, the hard part is people like him that's trying to do it right, and he can do everything right. But those 3 that do everything wrong will make everybody else look like they're wrong. That's
absolutely
the challenge. You know?
And that's a great point to transition, Officer Womble, Detective Womble. Sir, we saw one man on his knee on someone's neck, but we saw 3 other officers standing around not doing nothing. What?
Absolutely.
How is this? Why they should be arrested today too?
So you're absolutely correct, Pastor Tolbert. So today, our chief of police, Elvin Barron, he instituted a departmental policy that will hold officers accountable where you have a duty to act. And just because it's another police officer that's on the scene, well, you can't stand around with your hands in your pocket. That's not going to cut it. So I know for the Southfield Police Department, effective today, that is a policy that has just been enacted.
Okay, and that's good. That's effectual change.
Right.
Now to follow through, we know that's not on you as an individual, but I'm hoping that the department does follow up and follow through with that effectual change that has been made. We're going to open up the floor for questions, but before we do that, let's kind of bring a synopsis on each one of you giving something tangible that we can do, something tangible. So in my theology, it is here's the issue, here's the problem, but here's the solution. So I want to know from you, what is your solution tonight? But you can't take 10 minutes. We around the horn, so I'm gonna mute you if you go over the minute and a half. One solution. What can we do tonight? Let's start with you, Pastor Q.
One solution, that I would suggest would have to do, many people talked about one of the challenges that we face is that, there isn't a real relationship between the community and those who police these individual respective communities. And I know many of you have talked about how important, legislative measures are. So I would reverse the decision on residency, requiring that law enforcement officers live in the communities in which they serve.
Ooh, boy!
I know that's
my God, today
and everything like that is required that, but again, I think in many ways, one, it will provide young people an example in their neighborhood of a police officer, so that we have children in our communities who aspire to be police officers as a result of the leaders and role models they see in their community. It will give the police officers a better IQ of community relations and individuals in that community. And it will fortify communities so that these non-violent offenses that occur really due to poverty will become less intense, because neighborhoods will be stronger as a result of less crime, increased residency, and the like. So I would reverse the residency decision.
I like that. I need somebody from Trinity Church, I need you to write that down tonight. We are going to promote that. We need to reverse residency for police officers. If you work in Detroit, you need to live in Detroit. You work in Southfield, you need to live in Southfield. If you work in Pontiac, you need to live in Pontiac. If you work for Oakland County Sheriff, you need to live in Oakland County. Let's stop all this coming from different places. You coming from Howell somewhere, working for a Southeast Michigan agency and bringing Howell-like attitudes or wherever you're from into these urban environments. I think that when you're a part of the environment, then you work to preserve the environment. That is great. All right. Pastor Peyton, give me a solution.
I would say that if you believe that Black Lives Matter, start with your own life by exercising your voice while you still have it.
Exercising your voice.
The census, no one's talked about the 2020 census. That is of utter importance and significance. This is going to be one of the most consequential elections in I think my children's lifetime. And I think we have a responsibility to fully vet all of our elected officials and make certain that we have an agenda that we make known to them and will hold them accountable for executing.
All right. All right. So you're on the policy end. Dr. Davidson, give me a solution. What one thing we can do?
I believe that you should go to your local government and make sure that I think training is still important. I think diversity training, the money should be there for it. So there can be no excuse for law enforcement to say, well, we didn't have diversity training, because if you live in a different culture, and that residency piece is key. But if you don't understand culture and diversity and the variety of people that you're going to encounter, you got to have that money that's there. And a lot of times it's commissions and mayors that hold that money up from law enforcement agencies that then they can't give the training. So therefore you have people doing stuff with no training or lack of training. Though a lot of this is inherent in people, I think if you demand extensive training that you put money in, and if people do not come through that training the right way, it should be rigorous enough that they have to really come through and prove, and not you lose your job. So if you put the money in for rigorous training, I think then that training should be used in a way that you can tell whether the person really has it, or if they do not, if not, get them out.
All right, I like that. And so again, the financial piece, but in training. So all of us on the line tonight, we are all tweeners. We too old to be young and too young to be old, right? So have you all noticed that in your respective areas that you see police officers that you know are distinctively younger than you? I mean, like, wow, you are like 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. And here we are in our late 30s and 40s, and we're encountering these children, right? For the most part. But when they give these commands, they're not giving commands, just like as many of us as pastors, as we lead individuals, we're leading from the position of authority. And I think that too plays a mindset in our community, because it's like, hold on, man, you ain't gonna just talk to me like that. You're not gonna disrespect me like you a child. But they're not children. They while they might be young, they're still authority. They're still police officers. So I think that training, extensive training, I don't know what the timeline is on that, but riding through the city of Oak Park today, I saw a young guy who had to be in his early 20s. And I'm like, man, and I'm moving on. But nonetheless, Brandy, we on you. Give me a solution.
So I think I'm all about accountability. And I think these conversations are important. For me, I think that these conversations are important, not just amongst ourselves, because until white people are outraged just as much as we are, we need to get to a solution that they understand, that they have a voice to say that this is not okay. And so I think that having these conversations outside of just our own communities, and having these conversations where, I do think that there are people who understand and have those feelings and outrage, and we need to empower those people to be standing beside us as we are seeking these changes. And so I would say, to the extent that you have relationships and that you're building relationships and that there are people in power that you're having these conversations with those people so that they can understand that inherent bias that may be in them that they're not necessarily aware of.
Okay. All right. I like that. All right. Detective Womble.
The panelists all brought up great ideas. If I could throw something in there, it'll be community involvement. We as a community, we have got to get involved. We can sit back and we can say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, but until we actually put boots on the ground, it's a moot point. And also, we got to get out and vote. If our elected officials aren't getting the job done, then we need to get some bodies in there that will get the job done.
Okay. All right. I've gotten like 10 text messages when we talked about Pastor Q, when we talked about residency.
I know.
So I'm a chaplain for Detroit Police Department. Man, they are going ham. Like, you got to be kidding me. And so that residency piece is a big issue. I think that it warrants further discussion. But nonetheless, they are going crazy. You crazy, Reverend. You lost your mind. All right. But nonetheless,
I think a lot of that is something that needs to be unpacked, because it's really about how we view our communities. And honestly, like I saw a couple of comments about, what about the education system and things of that nature. We fail to realize of how intricately woven these things are. We fail to realize our public education system is based off of our property taxes. Property taxes is based off of having strong neighborhoods. When police officers move out of strong neighborhoods, you have lower property taxes, which gives the poor education. So again, I think that one of the challenges we have, particularly talking about kind of like that community involvement, is that I think that many of us have gotten caught into like this American way of doing things, that self-interest is our drive. And so thinking about what works best for ourselves. And so again, thinking about your own kind of personal safety will guide people in what neighborhoods they live in. But if you want to be a police officer, that's a privilege. Like, that's a privilege. And so if you want to, I think that there's just certain sacrifices that one should make to be well at the job that they do. So I apologize if I...
No, you good. You good, man. We going on. We got to go to these questions. But I do want to know, do you all ascribe to any of these conspiracy theories out here, as if they are trying to force us back into some form of segregation? Or like, Brandy, you said, white people need to get involved. Well, very, very clearly last night in Minneapolis and in Louisville, Kentucky, you could see that there were young white Americans who were out participating in the vagrant activities and looting in those two cities that I just named, in Louisville, Kentucky, and in Minneapolis. So, do y'all ascribe to any of the conspiracy theories like that? Like they're intentionally doing some of these things? No. All right. Just asking. Somebody's all right. We got questions on the floor. Y'all have been kind. Thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna send y'all send me your cash app. I'm gonna send y'all to dinner. That's gonna be on me. So
can I say one thing? Can I say one thing to the question? I saw your wife raised a very good perspective about the mental health of police officers. And I would like to ask Detective Womble, what do you believe? How valuable do you believe mental health evaluations are for officers? Because I don't know what kind of trauma one may face, that it could change how they police. Maybe they start a certain way, they face a traumatic experience, and it changes how they, handle people. They might not have been a certain way about an ethnic group until they had a bad experience, and then they never dealt with it from a counseling perspective, a mental health perspective. How much do you think mental health factors into some of what we see nowadays?
That's a great question. There's a saying that I have. I wish my head could forget what my eyes have seen in my 21 years of me doing this job. But you have to have an outlet. You can't take this home with you. We're not robots. I'm not conditioned. When I walk out of 26,000 Evergreen Road, which is where the Southfield Police Department is located, my day is over. I'm it. And from that point forward, I'm a dad. I'm a family man at that point. So And, you know, I think where we fall short, not just as police officers, as men, is identifying that, you know what, we might need some help. We might need to talk to somebody. So I think instinctively, that being a man problem, you know, we have to put egos, check egos at the door. And if something is not right, we got to get the assistance that's needed.
So, and you know what? I think Dr. Davidson and my wife proposed that question. I think that there should be some type of training involved with that. That should be implemented in some way. Just like those who work at meat packing plants, they have to go through some type of training after they have slaughtered so many animals, so many hours. I think that after so many hours on the street or on patrol or what have you, that there should be some standards for mental health in our respective areas, in our respective agencies. All right, I understand that there's a question on the floor, so we can go ahead and put that out there. And I just was told that even here in Metro Detroit, downtown Detroit, there was a peaceful gathering that just got unruly, and so I'm not sure if DPD is being deployed to that or not, but. Right. So these things are breaking out in our respective countries right now. I think people are tired, y'all. As I said earlier, we tired of being tired. We are not okay. The dude was in handcuffs. I think that's kind of what pissed me off the most is not because until you see the handcuffs, then there's a blank space where you are left to argue, okay, he might have did something, or maybe he had a weapon, or all of that, right? But to see him detained in handcuffs and he cannot defend himself, that I think that really just would push me over. Come on, there's a question on the floor. I want to thank Minister Jones for helping us. He's in our studio tonight with all of the questions. Come on, Brother Minister, give us. Okay, what is our demand to Biden as the presidential candidate? Oh wow. So our political prowesses are Pastor Q and Pastor Peyton. And so I'm going to let y'all take a stab at it.
I apologize. I just got a text message from one of my colleagues who's working on. She works very closely with Ben Crump in Minnesota right now, and apparently there was a young lady pepper sprayed in the face and beat with a baton, and she's 6 months pregnant, and that just happened in Minneapolis. So I apologize. I completely missed the question.
There it is. There it is on the screen. What is our demand to Biden? And that is terrible, by the way. As the presidential candidate, the Black agenda. What is our demand? What is our ask?
Well, for me, you know, I think it just starts with, you know, a real substantive plan on criminal justice reform. I think coming out of the gate, if Joe Biden is going to be a formidable candidate, I'm not going to give him a pass. And I think that on Sunday when he released, you know, Lift Every Voice, you know, that was a very flimsy, generic overview that we've always been sold. And I'm sick of it. And I think that, you know, they're talking about vetting, and he was looking very closely at Amy Klobuchar, for example. And comes to find out that, you know, she as prosecutor in the state of Minnesota, she actually reviewed many of the cases that were brought to her of these very officers who are now being charged in Minneapolis, and she did absolutely nothing on their cases. And these are the people that we you know, often put in office because we don't vet them properly, and then when they dangle carrots before us and never do anything substantively. And so I think that whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden or whether the Democratic Party, you know, through their convention has another nominee, somebody is going to have to come forth with a real, we need to come forth with a real substantive agenda that we tell them and that we expect for them to be able to accomplish. And many of our organizations have already accomplished that.
All right. Thank you, sir. You always on it. Pastor Q, we're going to come to you. But while we're coming to you, I was just notified that there's a blackout day scheduled for July 7th, a blackout day where African Americans are asked not to spend $1 American on July 7th. I'm sure that is coming forth It was released on Fox News, so that is happening. Just wanted y'all to know that. Pastor Q.
Yeah, when it comes to like the demands we have on president or presidential candidate Joe Biden, my mind is kind of split on that matter because one, I would probably direct our attention to more local kind of races because that position the president has. It does have some impact on our everyday kind of local experience, but not as much as the attorney general, the prosecutor, the commissioners who are in our local places of living. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes we put so much emphasis on the presidential candidates that we fail to really educate our community on those offices and positions that have a greater impact in our community. But if we were to demand anything of him, it would be that his care and service to the Black community be more than words. I think that's the demand, that it's more than words, that it goes beyond kind of the political stagery and really tries to, in substance, meet some of the challenges that are in our community.
Well, he done told us if we don't vote for him, we ain't Black. So, I think that regardless of what happens in that political race with president, I think we're going to be, if we get a new president, I think we're going to be in a better position than we are today as humanitarians, because that is just not what our current president brings to the table. Anybody else want to take a stab at this question? Dr. Davidson, Brandy, or Detective Womble? All right, understood. Brother Minister, we ready for the next question? All right, as you all know, the civil rights and other great movements involve the church. Ooh, Lord, as a strong tower, so to speak. How should the church respond today? This is one of those steps, Michael. We having the conversation, which I think is absolutely necessary. We're trying to put some feet to this. But we have some great leaders of churches and denominations sharing with us today. And so let's see, Dr. Davidson, as a forward leader, what is your response to this? How should the church respond today?
I do think the church is still the most valuable voice that we have for these times, in the sense that if you look retrospectively, it was a church, the Black pastor, the Black church, that basically ignited the fire for the civil rights movement. And then it led to politicians being more actively engaged. So what I personally believe would be of great value is if we had, when you talk about contextually the church, I think that we need all of the denominational leaders to collectively and collaboratively come together. But I think it needs to extend even beyond just the church. I think that you have to think about all of the religions. I think you have to think more of an ecumenical perspective. We need Catholics, Jews, we need Muslims, there needs to be a collective voice of people coming together. But I think that when you start bringing more religious voices together, that it's more than just a mere Christian problem that we're facing. We're facing a humanity problem. And because of that, I think you have to start thinking, we have to think wider than simply the church or a specific denomination. But I think we have to look at this holistically and collaboratively, that we need religious leaders across the nation coming together and sitting together and discussing together how do we as a collective voice speak truth to power, in the sense that we collectively say we're not with this. And again, it's going to require all ethnic groups being at that table, because if you look at the civil rights movement, it didn't just happen with just Black people and Black preachers. It happened with all types of ethnic backgrounds, all type of ethnic leaders. So we need people at the table who are not at the table trying to get paid, who are at the table trying to make progress. And we can't have leaders who are at the table just trying to get hype, to get fame and fortune, but leaders who are willing to get literally in the trenches and fight for people and have a collective voice for people. I think when you have leaders to start collectively coming together, then it starts to have a domino effect in all of those religious entities and organizations. that then we can see real change take place across the national perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like that. I think that it does start with us as African Americans first and foremost, as I saw that in one of the comments a few seconds ago. So we do have pastors on the line, but I want to know, Brandy and Jared, do you feel that the church? What do you feel the response of the church should be from a non-clerical position?
I'll say that I think that just as a collective, and as a community, it's how we organize, right? And so the church is a vehicle for doing that. And so I do think that, when you think of, like, when I think about it from a political perspective, the politicians want to come speak at the church, right? They want to come talk to the congregation because there's some power in that unity, in that collective movement. So I do think that, the church is integral in bringing us together on a collective front for action.
Okay. Jared?
Miss McClintock couldn't have said it better. She took the words out my mouth. I would echo those same sentiments.
All right, Pastor Q, church, what is our response?
Yeah, no, I would say play to our strengths. I think sometimes we try to remake ourselves to be relevant in these social movements. So I say play to our strength, and particularly that question that was raised earlier about mental health. I think we talked about it on the side of the police officers, but the side of the residents, the communities who are dealing with this sustained post-traumatic stress syndrome and the latent levels of trauma that they experience. If the church can be a place that people can kind of have those mental health challenges to be processed and worked through, I think that will strengthen us for the work that's necessary in building movements to transform our community.
All right, I think that all of us got some post-traumatic stress as of right now, because you don't have to be involved physically in the altercation, but I think that's what we are seeing in Detroit and Minneapolis and Louisville, Kentucky, and all these other places at this time where our people are suffering from post-traumatic stress, and eventually there's going to be some type of response. Now, also, let me say to you, my piece is keep using social media. Keep using your videos, your phones to record issues. Dr. King in the 60s and the civil rights movement with the situation with Emmett Till, situation started changing when Emmett Till's picture went live in that Ebony magazine. Situation started changing when they put the situation in Birmingham on national news, and people were able to see it. And that goes back to what I said originally. These things are not new. They've been happening right underneath our noses. But the difference is now that we have this exposure that we're able to see it. And now I think we are in this post-traumatic stress space where we are like, man, we're tired. And because we've been educated, because we have come up through respective ranks, we feel like I think it is our obligation to do something as the church. It's our obligation as pastors to get involved in these community initiatives, because at the end of the day, as we recapitulate, people know us. Police officers recognize us for the most part, especially in smaller markets, so to speak, or if by neighborhoods. And so, I'm hoping that we are able to continue to engage in getting actively involved in our respective communities. Pastor Peyton, did you want
quickly before you go on, I just want to correct the term we've been using. We said post-traumatic stress disorder, and as we've been hearing that, I'm like, no, maybe it's perpetual traumatic stress disorder, because we haven't gotten post of anything to see it after.
You own it. That's right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Absolutely. We ain't posting nothing. We involved right now. Pastor Peyton.
I think each of you, have spoken to the reality of what the church needs to get back to doing. It's not something that the church has not ever done. We've always been a place that has been able to organize well. We've always been a place where we've been able to wield our influence, our collective influence. I think that one of the things that the churches need to do, and I think you were alluding to that, Dr. Tolbert, is we have to get back to the realization that that our service to our church is not just to the members within our four walls, that the ministry is really the work of the community and serving the community. And once we can organize our members in our churches to understand that reality, I think that level of teaching and understanding and commitment to communal ministry will help to see some of the positive things we would like to see for our communities.
Well, let me say, sir, I believe Black lives matter, your life matter, my life matter, all lives matter. And I said this a long time ago, and it is off the cuff in the sense, but I want Black lives to matter to Black people. You know, we got to get to a place where we are loving on ourselves as well and policing our own community, so to speak, where, you know, back in the day where leaders or adults, I should say, in our respective communities had authority over everybody, over children in the community. We've got to get back to that. And, you know, we wanted freedom. We wanted liberty. We didn't want to answer to people as we were children growing up in our respective neighborhoods. But we got to get back to that, that if an adult, and I'm speaking to our community, an adult asks you something, you parents, you need to train your children. Your children should respect all adults. All adults. It is not something that should have to be earned in the sense of it takes a village to raise a child. We are all in this together, and so I think that accountability should be available and open in our respective areas and communities. We're gonna wrap up now. I mean, we could talk about this for forever. The original question tonight was: is it justice or is it just us? And I think all of us are clear. It's just us. It's just us. We are guilty until proven innocent. Now, since you know that, for those of you who are watching, you gotta act like that. You've got to move. I'm not here to say it's fair. I'm not here to say it's right. But you have to operate like you know you are guilty until proven innocent. And I think that is what's going to preserve lives. I think that's what's going to help us get home at night, and that's what's going to help these police officers get home at night, and I think we have to celebrate that. We're done. We're gonna wrap up. Final thoughts, Pastor Q.
Yeah, you know, my final thoughts is like I have been very quiet around this issue, just kind of been internally processing. And my final word is I probably spoke too soon. There is some real rage and anger and frustration that I feel because we're bringing the best of our minds to this work. And even the best of our minds in this work seems to still fall short in protecting the most vulnerable in our community, and that is it's infuriating. And so, you know, I encourage, you know, all of those people of faith to engage in a holy lament. You know, lament is holy, it's sacred, to lift our grievances to God and beckon His help, plead His help. In this matter, because at the end of the day, I think it was stated earlier, you know, all of our doing and trying and our efforts are for naught without God empowering it and equipping it to actually make a transformative difference. So I apologize if y'all seen this anger and frustration, but I'm still working through some things. Pray.
No, man, you're all right. This is a safe space as far as I'm concerned. Brandy, final thoughts.
I think for me, it's a matter of, you know, we're just exhausted and tired that this is the continual conversation and the fight. As we think about action and accountability and what can we do, I just simply say for us to keep at it, because this is more than just a hashtag. It's more than we come up with a hashtag every single time there's an incident that, you know, a week from now when this incident has moved on and the protest has stopped, and we're not hashtagging anymore. This is bigger than that. This is our lives. These are our children's lives, our husbands' lives, our fathers, our brothers, our sons, and they matter, and it's important. And I think we have to stay on that and stay on top of that and not wait for these type of things to happen in order to react and try to affect some kind of change.
Absolutely. I like that. One final thought there. There was several comments about the Pan-Hellenic Council. I think that it is intriguing that this was not intentional, but that all of us are a part of a Greek letter organization. And so I think that, you know, there is response, and that's a whole nother conversation. I often
doing that.
I often talk about the civil rights movement. and the fact that the Greek letter organizations did play a major part in the civil rights movement. And I think as a Panhellenic Council, we do need to come together and across organizational lines and effectuate change in this area. Pastor Peyton, final thought.
I don't have a final thought. I've exhausted my words for how I feel about this situation. I think that the distinguished guests, the panelists have done an outstanding job. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you all for being on. Dr. Davidson, final thought.
I feel like Rebecca felt when he said, raise those interrogatives to God, and then God said, the just shall live by faith. So I think we have to depend on God. That's my final thought. But secondly, James said, faith without works is dead. So that means we have to do something for God. We have to depend on God, but we need to do something. So we can't be prayer warriors, we praying and have a prayer partner and shouting and praise, and then we go home. I think we have to pray, but also we have to pursue victory. So we have to get out and do something. Depend on God, but do something. So that's what I say. You know, we can't lose faith in this and not trust God. But I will say this. This is a very tough space to be in as a believer right now, when we've been praying and asking God for 400 years, give us a victory. And we say he's a God that liberates the oppressed. And we keep being oppressed. It is a tough sale and conversation to share with somebody that God is on our side. Though I believe it, I promise you, I just pray very hard that God does something uniquely miraculous for us in this moment, that he reminds us, but he also reminds me that I owe you no explanation to be God, because I'm God, whether you like it or not. How I God, on God, I'm God, you know.
All right. Thank you, sir. Detective Womble, final thoughts?
I'll leave my departing words. Day in and day out, police officers across the nation don the uniform and do this job the right way. It is unfortunate that the 1%, 2% do it the incorrect way, and this is the end result. So just keep us uplifted and keep us in your prayer. We will get through this.
Thank you so very much. And sir, I hope that this conversation was not slanted in any way to demean the good work that so many police officers do in various agencies. We are grateful, thankful, and appreciative of your work. And I can speak for you personally. That's my man, Mike Lowry. I've been calling him Mike Lowry since Bad Boys came out. And we are appreciative of your service, sir, and the things that you do, the things you've done for the city of Detroit and what you do for the city of Southfield now. Pastor Peyton, I'm going to give you 1 minute if you want to share anything about Kwame Kilpatrick. That has not been the source of our conversation tonight, but you talked about that lynching piece, man. And I think that is so relative, because it is forcing us back into that conversation.
Well, you know, if I were to have one word in a minute, I would just say free Kwame. And we're still working diligently to secure his freedom. And hopefully in the days to come, we'll hear some news. And so I guess I would add that next Friday, June 5th, Ebony will be convening a national town hall on next Friday. So stay tuned to that. We have some extraordinary persons who are going to be a part of that conversation. And I think real policy, when we come together, and that's the goal for the town hall, is leveraging the Ebony brand to bring us all together so that we can begin to have the conversations, the dialogue, and the real policy strategies being discussed that will help free all of us. And so I think free Kwame is really saying, let us all free.
I like that. And, you know, someone sent me a video today of another mayor, a white mayor who was in the same situation, same exact charges, who is at home chilling. And I think that, you know, here it is, justice versus just us. Thank you all so very much for being on tonight. And we went much longer than we anticipated, but I think that this is a more healthy way of getting our emotions out and processing our emotions to a safer space. and yet our positions are being made very clear and others are benefiting from them, than to going out to our respective police stations and doing what people are doing in various cities tonight. So thank you all for your leadership. Thank you for what you do in the respective communities that you serve in your respective places and positions. I love y'all and thank you so very much. I'm going to ask, you know what, Brandy, come on and pray for us tonight.
Most gracious and Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for allowing us to come together, have this conversation, and to bring light into the situation, Lord. We ask that you just continue to uplift the family of those that have been affected, Lord.
Yes, God.
Uplift us as a people, Lord. That this is more than just a conversation, but there are lives that have been on the line, lives that have been lost.
Yeah,
And while we know that nothing can be done wrong through you, Lord, we just ask that you be with these families. Provide comfort. Provide peace to our people, Lord. Know that you are in the midst of all of this, despite how it may feel in the circumstance. Lord, I thank you just for this opportunity to come together. I ask that you just continue to watch over us, continue to lead and guide us. I ask each of these blessings and favor in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Y'all, everybody stay safe, encouraged, and together. We'll see you Sunday morning.
Thank you, sir.